They said the palace of Xerxes could hear the heartbeat of the world. Beyond its gates, rivers bowed to his bridges and kings to his shadow. The air inside was perfumed with saffron and fear, the scent of divinity and obedience. Yet among the countless chambers of Susa, one room was kept darker than the rest, sealed not by doors, but by silence. There, the King of Kings became merely a man, and the father of daughters he could neither love nor trust. When the wars against Greece ended, the songs of victory fell quiet. The empire that once sang his name now whispered about the sea, how it swallowed his ships, how even the gods turned their faces from his glory. Xerxes sat alone beneath ceilings, painted with stars, unable to sleep beneath heaven's eyes. Every victory began to sound like a curse. The daughters, born of his blood and the queen's grace, grew in that shadow of suspicion. They were educated in philosophy and faith, taught to walk as if watched by spirits. They were beautiful, yes, but beauty in the Persian court was a dangerous thing. To be loved by a king meant protection. To be feared by him meant doom. No chronicler wrote their names. No stone carries their faces. Only one record, a forbidden fragment, survived, found centuries later in a ruined archive near Persepolis. The ink was faint, the writing hurried, as if the hand that wrote it trembled. The king purified the world, but not his heart. It spoke of a ceremony hidden from the empire, an act so sacred it was never meant to be seen or remembered. It spoke of the daughters, and the night the moon itself refused to shine. Even now, historians argue whether the story is myth or truth. Yet each time a new ruin of the Achaemenids is unearthed, the silence feels heavier, as if the earth itself remembers what men tried to forget. So tonight, before the next page turns, I ask you, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. Because somewhere, perhaps even now, a father sits, sin still echoes through the corridors of time. And this piece of dark history was never meant to survive the archives. Before Xerxes was legend, he was lineage, son of Darius the Great and Atossa, daughter of Cyrus, the founder of an empire that claimed dominion from the Nile to the Indus. He was born not into freedom, but into destiny, a world built on gold, obedience, and fear of divine law. From the first breath, a Persian prince was told that his blood was fire. It burned purer, holier, and higher than all others. And in that belief lay both his crown and his curse. The Achaemenid court was no place for tenderness. Every glance was calculated, every word rehearsed beneath the painted ceilings of Persepolis. The great halls echoed with prayers to Ahura Mazda, the god of light and order. Yet in their marble shadows moved men who worshiped power more than truth. The court chroniclers wrote of balance, of the sacred duality between good and evil, truth and lie, Asha and Dr Rouge. But within the golden walls, that balance was always fragile. The king was believed to be the earthly mirror of divinity. To disobey him was sin. To disappoint him, blasphemy. His subjects kneeled as if before a god. His family, too, lived beneath that same weight, not as companions, but as reflections of his perfection. Among the inner chambers of Susa, the royal women were veiled, guarded, and isolated. Their beauty was spoken of only in metaphor, a rose behind marble. They were educated in poetry, astronomy, and law, but their existence remained political, ceremonial, and silent. To be a daughter of the king was to breathe within a gilded cage, watched by eunuchs and judged by priests. Xerxes inherited his father's empire and his pride. When Darius died, the ceremonies lasted months, a river of gold flowing from every satrapy, 1,000 sacrifices made beneath the Persian sun. Xerxes swore to complete what Darius had begun, the conquest of Greece, the humbling of the West. The empire stretched wider than any before it. Yet still he felt it was not enough. He demanded obedience, not only from men, but from nature itself. When a storm destroyed his bridges across the Hellespont, he ordered the sea whipped with chains and branded with hot iron, punishment for defying his will. Such arrogance, once worshipped, began to tremble beneath its own weight. In the royal archives, orders were written in meticulous ink, records of construction, of tribute, of death. The king's will was law, and that law was absolute. Yet the same ink that preserved his victories would one day reveal his fall. For among the many scrolls praising Xerxes' strength, one account, unsigned and incomplete, spoke of his daughters, kept apart from light for their protection. Protection. That word would echo through history, reshaped by those who feared what it truly meant. As his empire swelled, so too did his isolation. The women of his household became both symbols of purity and instruments of politics. The priests preached that royal blood must remain untainted. The counselors warned that foreign marriages threatened the empire's divine harmony. The daughters, each born of noble lineage, carried not affection, but obligation. Their beauty was the empire's mirror, their fate, its shadow. It was in those years, after Thermopylae, after the fires of Athens dimmed, that Xerxes' victories began to sour into suspicion. His mind, once vast and strategic, became a labyrinth of fear. Dreams of betrayal plagued his sleep. Whispers of disloyalty filled the corridors. Even the songs, sung in the women's quarters, began to sound like omens. And so the king, who had commanded oceans, turned his gaze inward, toward his own blood, his own house, and the hidden rooms where the daughters of Persia waited. The chronicles grow silent after that. The ink stops mid-sentence, as if the writer's hand hesitated. But history does not forget silence. It records it in its own way. In absence, in myth, in the haunting feeling that something sacred was broken, long before it was spoken. The summer after Greece burned was unlike any other. The empire, though victorious in name, felt hollow in spirit. From Egypt to Babylon, the air was thick with exhaustion, soldiers limping home, temples rebuilt, and the hum of mourning beneath every celebration. The Persian banners still flew, but the hymns beneath them had grown quieter, almost ashamed. Xerxes returned to Susa, not as the god-king of victory, but as a man bearing invisible wounds. He walked through the palace gardens, where every leaf was trimmed to perfection, and found no peace in the symmetry. The fountains sang of triumph, yet he could hear only the sea, the waves that had swallowed his fleet, the whisper of drowned men beneath his command. He had conquered kingdoms, but failed to conquer the one thing he could not name: fear. The court saw it before he did. The great king, whose command had once steadied nations, began to flinch at shadows. He summoned priests to cleanse his halls of unseen spirits, ordered astrologers to read the stars again and again, until their charts contradicted one another. He blamed the silence of the gods on corruption within his own bloodline. His counselors, eager to preserve their favor, spoke softly of omens and purification. They reminded him that Ahura Mazda's justice began at home, that a kingdom could not remain pure if its lineage was touched by deceit. If the royal daughters, educated by foreign tutors, whispered philosophies that questioned divine order. One night, a priest named Mithrava was summoned. He had served Darius before Xerxes, a man whose words dripped with authority and moral precision. He spoke not as a servant, but as an oracle. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply, "the empire sets, unrest mirrors your household. The gods require renewal. To cleanse the throne, one must first cleanse the blood." The king dismissed him, then recalled him the next night. By dawn, the first orders had been written, sealed with the royal cylinder, unspoken in their intent but clear in their consequence. The daughters, then in their youth, were recalled from their secluded quarters and forbidden from public ceremony. The queen's protests were silenced by ritual obligation. She was told it was a matter of divine protection. The servants were replaced by temple eunuchs, sworn to secrecy. The palace's inner corridors grew still, the laughter of the royal children replaced by the shuffle of priests and the hiss of burning incense. Outside, the empire continued its daily rhythm. Messengers came and went. Marble was carved for new monuments. The markets of Persepolis thrived under gold and dust. Yet within the palace walls, time began to move differently. Heavy, watchful, devout. No one dared speak of what the rituals meant, but everyone knew something sacred had shifted. The king's gaze no longer belonged to the empire. It was fixed upon his own reflection, and he no longer trusted what he saw there. At night, he walked the colonnades alone, the sound of his sandals echoing like judgment. In the torch's glow, the marble reliefs of his ancestors seemed to look away from him. One chronicler recorded a line before vanishing from history altogether. The King Xerxes' daughters were sealed in the house of purity, not for their sins, but for his. It is said that Xerxes, haunted by dreams of betrayal, began to confuse his lineage with his empire, to believe that the corruption of his bloodline would summon the fall of Persia itself. In this belief, whispered by priests and fanned by his own guilt, lay the seed of the tragedy that followed. From the outside, the palace lights still shone bright against the desert night, but beneath that golden glow, a darkness had already begun to grow, quiet, holy, and irreversible. In the archives of Persepolis, one damaged clay tablet bears a fragmentary inscription. The king performed purification beneath the moon. Seth's third shadow, the daughters entered veiled, and none returned before dawn. For centuries, historians dismissed